According to the Torah, what is the ideal system of Jewish governance?
It states in the Torah, in Sefer Devarim, Deuteronomy, Perek Yud Zayin, chapter 17, Pasuk Yod Gimel, verse 13. Ki tavo el ha'aretz, asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach. When you shall enter the land that Hashem is giving you, v'yirishta, and you having inherited it, v'yashavta ba, and having settled the land, v'amarta, and if then you shall say, Asima alai melech, I wish to appoint a king over me, over myself. Kechol hagoyim asher sevivothai, like all the nations round about. Som tosim alecha melech. These words, it is not so straightforward, not so obvious how to translate. Because according to one interpretation, Som tosim alecha melech means you may indeed appoint a king over yourself to rule you, to lead you. But according to another interpretation, Som tosim alecha melech is not simply giving us permission to do so, but is instructing us to do so. Som tosim alecha melech, so you should, you must, or you may go ahead and do so. Asher yivhar Adonai Elohecha bo, someone that Hashem chooses. Mikerev ahecha, from amongst your brethren. Tosim alecha melech, you shall appoint this king. Lo thuchal lothet alecha ish nochri, you may not appoint as your leader a foreigner. Asher lo ahicha hu, someone who is not your brother. In the Sifrei, a Midrash Halacha on Sefer Devarim, it states, Som tosim alecha melech. This is another interpretation of this verse, of this pasuk. Som tosim alecha melech miswat aseh. This is a positive commandment, states the Sifrei. Lo thuchal atheth alecha ish nochri. You may not appoint a foreigner. Miswat lo ta'aseh. This is a negative commandment. But as we're about to see, this is only one opinion. We should also mention that we find in Sefer Shemuel, the book of Samuel, Shemuel Aleph Perek Heth, Samuel 1, chapter 8. V'yitkabbasu kol ziknei Yisrael. All the elders of the Jewish people gathered together and went to Shemuel, the prophet, Samuel. V'yomeru elav, and they said to him, Hine ata zakanta, you are old, uvanecha lo halechu b'drachecha, and unfortunately your sons have not followed in your footsteps. They were found wanting in a number of respects. It was obvious to everyone that they would not be able to lead the Jewish people. They were not worthy and not capable and not competent to do so. Ata, and therefore, now, asima lanu melech l'shoftanu kechol hagoyim. Appoint a king over us, like all the nations. But Shemuel did not like this idea at all. Vayera hadavar be'anei Shemuel. This suggestion was not well received by Shemuel at all. It was very negative in his eyes. Ka'asher omeru tana lanu melech l'shoftanu. When he heard them say, appoint a king over us to lead us. Some would perhaps translate also to judge us. وَيِتْپَلَلْ شَمُوَلَ الْأَدُونَي, and Shmuel turned to Hashem for advice. What did Hashem say to Shmuel? وَيَوْمَ الْأَدُونَي الْشَمُوَلِ شَمَعْ بِقَوْلِ هَعَمْ. Listen to the people. لَخَوْلَ الشَّيْ يَمُرُوا إِلَيْخَ, whatever it is they ask of you. كِي لَا أَوْفِخَ مَأَسُوا, they have not tired of you. They do not want to be rid of you. Ki othi ma'asu, they have turned their back on me, they are sick of me, min maloch aleihem, from ruling over them. This has to do with the second translation I just mentioned. L'shoftenu, appoint us a king, l'shoftenu, to judge us, implying that it wasn't only to lead us as a king does, but also to judge, that is to say, to establish laws and various institutions to regulate the activities of the Jewish people, implying that the king is not bound by the Torah, but he is the source of legitimacy, the source of the law. Whereas the correct and authentic Jewish approach is that no one, including the king, is above the law, and only Hashem, only the Torah is the source of legitimate law. The implication in their request was that we want a king to be like the kings of other nations, who decide what the law should be, whatever seems right to him. We do not wish to be bound by Hashem's instruction. And in the Talmud Bavli, Sanhedrin Kaf Amud Beth 20b, we find a number of opinions amongst the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer states, Zeqinim shebador kahoren sha'alu. The elders, those who wish to follow in the path of the Torah, wish to follow Hashem, their request was well-intentioned. Sha'alu kahoren. Their words were, Tana lanu melech l'shoftanu. Give us a king to lead us. So here the word l'shoftanu is understood to mean to lead us, which is necessary. The Jewish people must have a leader. Aval ameh haaretz shebahem, but the fools, the knaves, the light-headed and foolhardy, and those not very committed to Hashem and the Torah, and the Jewish people being a unique people under Hashem, their intention was different. The Amei Aretz shebahem qilqalu, they wished for a negative outcome. Their agenda was not a positive one. V'hayinu gam anachnu kechol hagoyim. We wish to be like all the other nations. So this statement reveals their true intention. The request, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the request to appoint a king like all the nations was really motivated by a will to be like all the other nations. It was not because of some constitutional crisis or political crisis. Perhaps that was also the case, but there was an additional agenda involved, which was a non-Jewish, non-Torah agenda. That is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. There is also the view of Rabbi Nehorai. Rabbi Nehorai says, Lo ne'emra parasha zo ela keneged tar'um tham. This parasha, this entire parasha in the Torah in Sefer Devarim, was stated precisely to be a ready response to the complaints and the misconceived ideas of the people who would demand such a king. Well, as it says, وَأَمَرْتَ عَصِيمُ عَلَى مَلَخ, and if you shall say, I wish to appoint a king. We shall discuss this in a moment further and explain this terminology, وَأَمَرْتَ, and if you shall say. And there is a third opinion. Rabbi Yosef is quoted here as saying, Shalosh misvoth nistabu Yisrael bichnisatham la'aretz. 3 commandments the Jewish people were required to fulfill upon entering Eretz Yisrael, upon entering the land of Israel. Laha'amid lahem melech, the first is to appoint a king. Lahachrith zar'o shel Amalek, the second was to wipe out the Amalekites who had attacked the Jewish people. Ulivnoth lahem betha bechira, and the third was to build the temple. Rambam, Maimonides, at the beginning of Idchot Melachim or Milhamoth, the section in Mishneh Torah, where he deals with all things to do with the running of the Jewish state, kings and wars, Idchot Melachim or Milhamoth, famously quotes that opinion of Rabbi Yosef, that there are these 3 misvot, these 3 commandments that the Jewish people are required to perform upon entering the land. So according to that position, and this is in fact Rambam's position, not only that of Rambam, it is a positive commandment of the Torah that the Jewish people appoint a king. In other words, a monarchy is the prescribed system of governance for the Jewish people. This is also the opinion of the Ramban, in his Perush on the Torah, but it is by no means the only opinion. It is not clear from the discussion in the Talmud that we just quoted from in Masechet Sanhedrin, it is not clear what the halakha should be, and it is easy to demonstrate this fact in the Perush of Rav Saadia Gaon on the Torah in Sefer Devarim Perek Yud Zayin, chapter 17. He translates the term Som Tasim Alecha Melech. Mutar lecha lahamid lecha melech. You may, if you wish, appoint a king. You have permission to do so. However, lo tuchal lathet alecha ish nochri, but you may not appoint a foreigner. Eno mutar shetamid ish alecha ish nochri, but you may not appoint a foreigner as leader of the Jewish people. That is Rav Saadia Gaon. He also repeats this position in his Sefer HaMiswoth, in his in the work which he composed on the 613 Miswoth of the Torah. There too he expresses this opinion, that appointing a king is something we are permitted to do, but not commanded to do. This is also the view of Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra and his Perush on the Torah. He says, Som Tasim Reshuth, just like Rav Saadia Gaon. With regards to what the Torah states, that if you do appoint a king, it has to be al pi Hashem. In other words, it has to be Asher yivhar Adonai Elohecha bo, someone that Hashem chooses. How does Hashem choose the king? Al pi Navi, explains Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra, if there is a prophet, you have to consult the prophet who can receive such communication from Hashem. So first of all, we have to take note of the fact that both in the Talmud, in Masechet Sanhedrin, and amongst the major mefarshim, the major commentators on these Pesukim in Sefer Devarim, there is no unanimity, there is no agreement. There are those who understood it to be a suggestion of the Torah, or something that we are permitted to do, if we so wish, but we are not commanded to do so. A monarchy is not a prescription commanded by Hashem. Others saw it as the only sanctioned form of Jewish governance. And this is left somewhat open. The question is left open in that Talmudic discussion. And that is why we find these different opinions. Rambam says one thing, Rav Saadia Gaon says something else, etc. Rabbi Ovadia Seforno states as follows. He wishes to explain why did the people ask at that time when they spoke to Shmuel, and why does the Torah discuss appointing a king kechol hagoyim? If the Jewish people decide that they need to have a monarchy, go ahead and say, Asima alai melech, I wish to appoint a king. But why stress kechol hagoyim, like all the nations? What does that mean, like all the nations? Rabbi Ovadia Seforno explains that like all the nations means a hereditary monarchy. The position of king is to be inherited and is to be passed down from father to son. In other words, we are speaking of a royal family. That the kingship will be his and be handed down to his descendants. Not like the leaders we find in the Sefer Shofatim, generally described as translated as the book of Judges, but more correctly the book of leaders, because the term Shafat, the Shoresh, the root, Shin Pe Taith, can also mean judge, but it can also mean leader. For the simple and obvious reason that a judge is also a kind of leader. He gives direction, he decides things, and his word is final. In other words, Rabbi Ovadia Seforno says, the Jewish people obviously require leadership. There has to be a system of governance. And he goes on to prove this from Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Rabbi Ovadia Seforno is referring to what we find in Sefer Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, Perek Kav Zayin, chapter 27, when Moshe Rabbeinu is informed by Hashem that he will not be leading the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael, he will not enter the land. Immediately, Moshe Rabbeinu turns to Hashem and says, this is in Pasuk Tetwav 15, Vaydaber Moshe el Adonai lemor. Moshe spoke to Hashem, saying, Yifqod Adonai Elohei haruhoth lechol basar ish al ha'ida. Please, Hashem, appoint a person over the people. Asher yaseh lifnehem, a person who shall lead them. Asher yavo lifnehem, he will go into battle before them. Asher yosiem, asher yiviem, v'lo tihiyeh adat Adonai kathon asher en lohem ro'eh. So that the people, the Jewish people, Hashem's people, adat Adonai, literally the community, the nation of Hashem, will not be like a herd of sheep without a shepherd. In other words, Rabbi Ovadia Seforno wishes to make the point, which really is self-evident, that the Jewish people, no less than any other people, and probably much more than other people, other nations, requires leadership and direction. And therefore, clearly there has to be a leader of the Jewish people. The question is, what kind of regime, what kind of system are we to opt for? So he explained that having a Jewish leader, most definitely yes, but having an hereditary monarchy. He says, Omnam sheyeh hamelech k'malchei hagoyim mahazik b'malchuth. The idea of having a king who leads the Jewish people, who leads his nation, who was zar'o, he and his descendants, nim'as esela el yitbarech. This is not desired. This is in fact rejected by Hashem, and that is why, according to this interpretation, the request of the people to have a king, when they turned to Shemuel and they requested to appoint a king, kachol hagoyim, as it says here in the Torah also, if you will request to appoint a king, kachol hagoyim asher savivotai, like all the nations round about, their meaning was, their intention was, we wish to set up a system like all the nations around about us, which means an hereditary monarchy. And this is not correct, says the Sforno. The ideal is something else. The ideal is to have a person who is competent and worthy, God-fearing, and capable of leading the Jewish people, and he is to be leader for life, or as long as he is capable of performing that task. Such a person is to rule and decide and direct the Jewish people and give them a sense of purpose and direction in their national existence, as long as he is able to perform that task. And when the time comes, another person will be appointed in his stead. Now, it is true that there remains a point that needs to be clarified, and that is, what do we actually decide in terms of this question? Should the leader of the Jewish people be a member of a royal family who inherits that position? Or should we have a system where the leader of the Jewish people is appointed in some manner, but not necessarily, we're not discussing necessarily an hereditary monarchy or system of government. As we mentioned earlier, this point is not decided conclusively in our various sources. Let us therefore say as follows, without going into the very serious discussion of how we understand the concept of the Davidic dynasty, the promise made by Hashem to David HaMelech, King David, that his descendants would rule on the throne. That is a discussion unto itself, a very important discussion, but let us set that aside for now and adopt this position that we find in Rabbi Ovadia Seforno, and keeping in mind also that Rambam, who does support the idea and in fact the necessity of appointing a monarchy which is to be hereditary, Rambam himself also admits that it is possible to appoint a king who is not from that royal family. For whatever reason it may be at that time, that it is not desirable or possible to find a member of that family to rule the Jewish people, it is possible to find another person, to appoint a different person, not from that royal bloodline. So adopting that position for a moment, we have to ask ourselves, how would we go about choosing such a person? From the pasuk that we read earlier, a person who is chosen by Hashem, and this implies that we are to turn to a prophet. That is also something that needs to be explained. What about a time when there is no prophet? If there is a prophet, we know from Rambam, who discusses this, that when appointing a king, it is to be done both by a prophet working together with the Beit Din HaGadol, the great Beit Din, the great Sanhedrin. And if there is no king, if there is no prophet at that time, it is possible and also necessary, as we said, the Jewish people must have leadership. It is necessary and proper that the Beit Din is in charge of this process. And nevertheless, we can ask legitimately, how exactly should we go about doing so? Rav Kook, Rabbeinu Avraham Yitzchak Kohen Kook Zitzal, in his work Mishpat Kohen on page Shin Lamed He 338, mentions in passing this discussion, and he says that a leader of the Jewish people is to be appointed al pi da'at ha'kalal with da'at Beit Din. This is the expression he uses, al pi da'at ha'kalal with da'at Beit Din. And then he goes on to say, Wadai omedhu bimkom melech. Such a person would, having been appointed, is considered a king for all purposes. He has all the authority and all the powers of the king as described in all our sources, and also as described in Rambam, for example, who is in favor of a hereditary monarchy. But even if the position is not an hereditary one, such a person, having been duly appointed, has all the powers and authority of a king. Whether we call him a king, a melech, or a nasi, which is often translated as president, although that's perhaps not the most precise translation, is not really that important. What we are to understand is that that leader is the supreme leader of the Jewish people, and he has much authority and power, and also tremendous responsibility, of course. And it is not something that, having been appointed, this person is not up for election every few years. This person is to rule as long as he is fit and able to do so. And still, we have to explain, what does that mean to choose a leader al da'at ha'kalal, according to the popular will or opinion, wa al da'at Beit Din, and according to the opinion or the judgment and the position of the Beit Din, of the Sanhedrin, of the Beit Din HaGadol, the supreme Torah council of the Jewish people. How is this to be, these two concepts to be reconciled? If it's a popular election, then it's just al da'at ha'kalal, it's just something that people decide by some kind of referendum, some kind of election. Whereas if it is something based on the Beit Din's opinion, if the Supreme Torah Council of the Jewish people is involved, then that's something quite different. And in that case, what role and what function do the people play? The way to understand this suggestion of Rav Kook seems to me is as follows. The Beit Din HaGadol would announce that it is necessary to appoint a leader for the Jewish people. And we wish the people, the public, to send us recommendations of men fit for this purpose, including some explanation as to why you think this person is the correct and proper candidate for this enormous responsibility. So the public could make suggestions. Of course, the members of the Torah Council, the Sanhedrin, the Beit Din HaGadol could do the same. And thus, there would be perhaps many, perhaps even hundreds of suggested candidates. Then, these candidates would need to be tracked down and interviewed, and find out more about them and interview them personally and get to know them well. And eventually, the Beit Din, the Torah Council, would come up with a short list. I imagine something like 3 or 4 people that we have received all these suggestions, we have looked into the matter, we have discovered who these people are, we have had a chance to consider who is the correct type of person with the required necessary talents and capabilities and vision. Vision is a very important, very central matter here, to lead the Jewish people. Obviously, we're talking about someone who is going to be connected to the Torah and Hashem in every fiber of his being, because that is the overarching responsibility of the Jewish leadership, to lead the Jewish people to live their lives and to move forward in history according to the will of Hashem, according to the Torah. And that is precisely why the Torah says you may not appoint a foreigner, because a foreigner, and by the way, this includes a Jew who is not committed to the Torah, such a person is also considered an ish nochri, as we see in the Targum attributed to Yonathan ben Uziel on the Torah. It was not written by Yonathan ben Uziel, but it is usually known as Targum Yonathan or Targum Yerushalmi, where that term ish nochri is translated in the Aramaic as a gavra or gvar hilonai. The word hilonai means someone who is strange or estranged from the Torah, someone who does not view the world through the prism of the Torah, of the Jewish people. He views the world according to some foreign Gentile understanding and philosophy, perhaps. He does not subscribe to the ideology of the Jewish people. A person, Jewish or not, who does not subscribe to that is not fit and not capable of ruling and leading the Jewish people. So we have looked at all the various people suggested. We have looked into them, checked them out, we have vetted them, we have interviewed them, and we have come up with a short list of people, each one of whom, in our view, could be the leader of the Jewish people. And now we hand over this decision to the people. In other words, from this short list, shall we say, of 3 people, we wish the people to elect the person that seems the most correct and the most fitting and the most desirable in their eyes. And thus, this person, this leader, would be chosen both by popular vote, by popular acclaim, and also by the Beit Din. In other words, the Beit Din would lay the ground rules. What kind of person, what kind of candidate is possible for this role? This would, of course, exclude, therefore, all those people who are not relevant, who are not appropriate, who are not fitting, who are not God-fearing, who do not subscribe to the Torah in a completely, who are completely committed to the Torah. Such people who cannot be described as committed to the Torah, people who do not have these basic qualities, would be excluded from discussion. And now we have come up with this short list of people, and now you can choose. As we also see that Shmuel, when he was directed to choose Shaul as the first king, Saul the first king of the Jewish people, he brought this person, Shaul, before the people, that they should see him and express their willingness to accept him as king. So popular acclaim and consent is also part of the process. This, it seems to me, is what Rav Kook had in mind, and this is a system that could, in fact, even at the present time, If we were so minded, if the Jewish people were to get their act together, this is something that could be achieved and made to work in the real world. Bezrat Hashem, b'mihera v'yameinu.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.